Hello and welcome to the TMC Newsroom. My name is Rich Tehrani. Thanks for watching. We're in Silicon Valley this week speaking to some of the best and brightest companies in the area. On our program is Amir Makleff. He is the president and CEO of Bridgewave. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So why don't we start with just what's new at the company and maybe a brief overview for those people that are new to you.
Sure. So in terms of what the company does, we focus on high-capacity backhaul for mobile operators, as well as for enterprises, private networks. And our specialty is in the very high frequencies, 60 and 80 gigahertz primarily. And we try to solve the 4G problems, where people are trying to migrate their networks to 4G. They need gigabit capacity or close to a gigabit. And they're looking for solutions that are future-proof. That's where we come in. So our products have been focused in three areas. One is a backhaul for, I'll call it macro cells for networks that are migrating to 4G and using primarily 80 gig technology. 2 years ago, we started to deploy large quantities with Clearwire. And in fact, the New York market is all based on Bridgewave 80 gig technology. And then, as you probably know, Clearwire stopped buying for a while and stopped upgrading the network. So there was a bit of a pause. And now what we're seeing is this phenomenon of using 80 gig technology to provide backhaul for 4G is starting to catch on around the world. And most of the traction we actually have is outside of the US. And a lot of it is with very large carriers and very big partners. And there is some excitement in Europe, Eastern Europe, Middle East, a lot of contracts going on. The problem that I have is that many of the deployments are through partners that don't want us to discuss the details.
Sure.
So all I can say is that 80 gig is taking off around the world and in a big way.
Can you tell us countries?
Russia is very big.
Okay.
Russia is very big, and the reason is that the Russian regulator have set rules for 80 gigahertz that make it super attractive. So all the big carriers in Russia have started to deploy 80 gig equipment, and those that have not deployed yet have done RFPs and are about to select vendors. And I would say that we are a very big part of most of these deployments.
Most of them, huh? That's great.
Most of these deployments. But it's not only Russia. There's stuff going on in Germany, stuff in the Middle East, some in Asia, but to a less extent. So there's a lot of activity there.
That's great. So in terms of how the market is changing, what are you seeing in the last few years?
Yes. So the 80 gig success that I'm talking about, that I've talked about, is the current trend. But what we see moving forward is more focus on the migration to small cells. It's become very well understood now by the carriers that in order to do 4G, you must have a very high density of cells. And the only way to do a high density of small cells is to use picocells or small cells,
right,
whichever, or microcells, whichever way you want to call them. So that's the new rage. So far, it is largely, marketing announcements and hand waving.
Right.
There is not much that is really happening yet, because
right,
typically the carriers do, some deployment of macro cells with LTE, and once they have that, they start to focus on filling in the space with smaller cells. But we've been advocating the use of 60 gigahertz as a unique technology to solve the small cell backhaul problem. And we're getting very good response from those folks that actually have studied the different options. Because if you think about, I have a VCR size small cell that I want to hang on a light pole. And now I have a few hundred megabits coming out of it, and I have to backhaul this traffic. What do I do? And it turns out that there's not that many good options. Fiber is not likely to be available as a good option for that in most cases. And it turns out that wireless technologies in a situation like this are not always easy to work because there's not enough spectrum available, you may not have line of sight, and things of that nature. So now that people have figured out that small cells is the big next thing, the recognition is we need to solve the backhaul problem, and that's where we think we have a solution. We've done some trials with carriers, and it has received very good feedback, but it's not yet in the implementation phase. It's probably going to be later next year before this starts to get deployed in large volumes. So we think this is the next big thing, is the migration to small cells and how you tackle it from a backhaul problem.
Now, from a competitive standpoint, what are you seeing in the market? You've got a bunch of companies doing similar things, right? Some are in Asia, Canada, Israel. I know of a few companies.
The reality is that in the particular space we're in, which is 1680 gigahertz, either small or macro cell backhaul, we actually own 80% market share. So there is a bunch of small guys that are nibbling at our heels a little bit here and there, but we are kind of a big gorilla in a small space that is growing very fast. There are bigger guys that are now kind of making some moves to step into this arena, but none have actually done it yet. So there are rumors and innuendo, but nobody of the big guys have stepped in yet. So we're really, at the moment, when it comes to
Those are the Asian companies that you were referring to just now?
No, it's not Asian company.
Okay.
No. There is only one Korean company that has been in the space for a long time and not done very well. The Asian companies, one of them is actually making some noise about entering the space later. But it can be a year and a half before they actually have a product.
Now I'm thinking Huawei. Am I thinking correctly, or
Yes.
ZTE? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but all the big guys are either partnering or thinking about doing their own. But at the moment, we still have the early advantage, the first mover advantage. Right. So obviously the landscape will change. When this becomes hundreds of millions of dollars market, we're not going to be alone because that's the nature of the beast.
Of course.
It's always competitive.
Of course.
But we're trying to stay ahead. We're trying to strike technology deals that enable us to be on the bleeding edge of driving the cost down. We think the next big thing is going to be how you take these very high capacity systems that are still quite expensive and bring them down to price points that are similar to microwave systems that are substantially cheaper. And we have done some of the technology moves that I cannot yet discuss in order to put us in a position to drive the cost down over the next year to a very, very aggressive pricing level.
Great. Well, hopefully you'll come back and share your success with us in the future.
We will.
Thanks, Amir.
Okay.
Appreciate it.